Dover Sports Talk worldwide with some news from the world of boxing. So y'all know what time it is. You ain't in a rush to get concussed. Now we got some news from the super middleweight division. That's Canelo Alvarez's division now, so maybe that's, the face of boxing is there, so maybe people might focus on that division. Canelo Alvarez has stated that he wants to become undisputed in that division. I'm not sure how many people care about that, seeing as though he said the same thing about the 160-pound division, which is the middleweight division, and that's a more prominent division. But nevertheless, that's what Canelo says. Canelo comes in and beats up Callum Smith, although there was short notice for Callum Smith, but Canelo did a good job on Callum Smith, basically. He has the WBA title, beating Callum Smith, but the WBC is also just gave him the WBC title. So he has two titles, and he wants to unify. So he's going to fight his mandatory in Yildirim, which is probably one of the weakest mandatories ever. But he's going to fight him, Yildirim. After that, it seems to have to be set in stone with him and Billy Joe Saunders fighting in May, which is also, there's some issues there. And then he wants to follow that up with the IBF champion in Callum Plant, who just come off a good win of Caleb Truex. So that's what Canelo, his scenario would be. Now, Eddie Hearn has come out and he said something that's interesting, because Eddie Hearn has taken over Canelo for the Yildirim fight and for the Billy Joe Saunders fight, because he's representing Billy Joe Saunders now, Mr. Eddie Hearn. And Eddie Hearn is, he's famous for basically being Anthony Joshua's promoter, Matchroom CEO, and in charge of Matchroom, seems as though his father gave it to him. So, Eddie Hearn's out there. Now, Eddie Hearn has said, now, listen, if after May, this Caleb Plant fighting in September, man, Caleb Plant needs to fight David Benavidez, the former WBC 168-pound champion. He was stripped of his title for missing weight, and then he was stripped of his title, and they didn't give him a chance to fight for it back against Yildirim. They just gave it to Canelo. Now, Canelo, we've documented he wasn't trying to fight David Benavidez. So when Benavidez was stripped, similar to when Demetrius Andrade was stripped by the WBO a few years back at 154 and was placed by Leon Smith, Canelo then fought Leon Smith, never wanting to fight Andrade. He didn't never want to fight David Benavidez. He got stripped. Then he was able to fight. Matter of fact, he didn't have to fight nobody. He fought Callum Smith for WBA, and then they gave it to him. Those are facts that, irk people who pay attention or who are just going to be fair, right? But anyway, so the thing is, he's saying that Caleb Plant needs to fight David Benavidez, so the fight against Canelo in September will be large. It'll be a huge fight. I agree. It's not a bad thing, because you want the fight against Canelo to be big. Now, the problem I'm having with that is that's exactly the same thing that I would say with Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders is going to fight Canelo in May, and he's not coming off of doing anything big anyway, except making a lot of mistakes in the internet and saying things on Twitter and all that. I'm not going to get into him. He's just one transgression after another. He shouldn't even be that after being doped. And Billy Joe Saunders should be fighting Demetrius Andrade, right? And then the winner of that fights Canelo in May. Demetrius Andrade and Billy Joe Saunders were talking about fighting February, but then all of a sudden it was crickets and nobody answered. I think that Eddie Hearn has to be embarrassed when he's talking to Demetrius Andrade. Demetrius Andrade came to him about a year and a half ago, before Billy Joe Saunders was there, definitely before Canelo was there, and thinking that he was going to get a fight with your boy Gennady Golovkin or Canelo Alvarez, who were both at the Zone. So he comes, signs with the Zone, so he can be right there on the same side of the street, like we always say, and couldn't get a fight on the same side of the street with Gennady Golovkin or Canelo, which led Eddie Hearn to start talking about Charlo on the other side of the street, right? Couldn't get nothing on the side of the street. Then he signs Billy Joe Saunders after Billy Joe Saunders was doped and couldn't fight Andrade. Imagine that. And now, all of a sudden, Billy Joe Saunders gets the fight before Andrade does with Canelo, right? Doing all these transgressions. So I know that's very embarrassing for him to be, to be talking to Andrade. He probably doesn't even really want to call Andrade, And the thing about this too is Eddie Hearn is not in charge of Canelo except for the Yildirim and the Billy Joe Saunders fight. So what is he worried about? What the man does against Caleb Plant in September? It's not his issue. Right? But the thing is, if you like that scenario, that somebody fights and makes the fight big with Canelo, You have Billy Joe Saunders right there, and you have Demetrius Andrade right there. That fight should be the one you have. And then the fight with Billy Joe Saunders in May is big. The same thing. The same exact scenario. I don't see why he doesn't say that. But he's going to have to answer to Andrade about that, because I'm sure Andrade's like, what, dude, you can't get me nothing. You get all these dudes that keep messing up. And I know this conversation is straight up. He has to tell him, dog, you know, hey, brother, they don't like your paint job. That's all that is. I can't do the same things. I'm asking. I'm sure he's asking. Can't get it. Right? But let me tell you something. Canelo Alvarez and Eddie Hearn, watch what I say, a problem is imminent. There will be a little beef. Canelo's going to have to let him know, listen, dude, I've banned Billy Joe Saunders from fighting Demetrius Andrade in February, right? Because Demetrius Andrade could possibly win. And I'm going to ban Callum Plant from fighting David Benavidez sometime in May, because, damn it, I don't want to have to fight David Benavidez either. Right? This defeats the purpose of me not fighting these guys. I didn't want to fight David Benavidez. I told the WBC that, so I ain't doing it. And I ain't never fighting Demetrius Andrade. I would have done it 6 years ago, 5, 4, 3, 2 years ago. It's definitely last year when it was undisputed. Those two things ain't happening. So make sure you get the memo. I'm banning them from fighting. That's what's really going on. Watch what I tell you. This Eddie Hearn won't be saying this too much longer if he wants to deal with Canelo. That's the deal. Doma Sports Talk worldwide. And I'm up out of here, y'all.